Greetings everyone and welcome to BIO168, Anatomy and Physiology, the first semester. So what we're looking here is the Moodle shell. This is what you will see, or something similar to this, whatever your courses are. You will see your Moodle shell and you'll see the courses that you're taking this semester. So one of them should be BIO168, Anatomy and Physiology 1. Now I have grouped all three sections into one Moodle shell. So when we go in here, we will see the course shell for BIO168, Anatomy and Physiology 1. Here we will find the course syllabus in this start here. Eventually, you will find this video in here as well. What we will see is this area is going to be updated continually. So it's very important that you check this continually. And we'll see that we have our lecture units are broken down into 4 units, and we have lab units that are broken down into 3 units. And when you open these, you will find the materials pertaining to this unit within these tabs. So for example, in Unit 1, we're going to be covering chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we will be covering all of these chapters, all of the things relevant to these chapters, a lot of these. For example, these URLs will link to different video lectures, video materials, and so forth. You will also see something that says stuff you are likely to see on the test. Now, I don't have one of these for every chapter, but if you see one of these, it's a really good idea to look at it because what it shows you is stuff you're really likely to be on the test. So if you see one of these, definitely download it and use it because it will give you a lot of information. It'll give you a heads up as to the concepts and the ideas that we really need to be focusing on for this chapter. It will also give you an outline form, very specific things that you'll want to know. So for example, I'll just open this and we will see a good example of what it's going to look like here. So I've opened it, it's come out on the other screen. So I'll move it up here onto this screen that I'm sharing. And we'll see that we have, for example, Chapter 1 main points. So we have some definitions here. We have some of the key concepts here and the basic ideas that I want you to know for this chapter. So if you open this, you'll see some definitions and basically some information here that pertains to all the major concepts that we're going to be studying. And so if you see one of these, once again, you should definitely download it and you should definitely look at it. And we'll see them for most of the chapters except for 2 or 3. So if I have time, I may make some more of these for the last 2 chapters in the last unit. But basically, what you're going to see is they're going to be very useful for you. And they'll sort of point you in the right direction. The next thing you'll see is we have 4 lecture units. What does that mean? That means we're going to have 4 lecture tests. And those will be occurring about every 4 weeks within the course. We also have 3 lab units. And so the material for each lab unit is going to be posted here. You see we'll have some of our lab quizzes will be online. But we will see that we have at least 10 lab quizzes. And of these 10 lab quizzes, I will drop at least 1 grade. So if you miss a lab quiz for whatever reason, then you can drop your lowest grade. So you will see the labs are listed by lab here, which lab is which, and the materials that are going to be useful in this lab. So some of these materials will be updated. So you might see some are hidden from students. This needs to be updated. You'll get a more updated version of this as we move through the course. You won't see this, obviously, but I will until I put it up there. So what you're going to see then is a lot of stuff that is useful for studying the materials of the lab. A lot of the lab we're going to do what we call the pre-lab online. And that's because we have very little time in lab because of the fact that we still are restricted to having only 12 people in the lab at a time. So when we do the microscope and the tissue lab, for example, you will need to have seen how the microscope works, how to get it out, how to set it up, and then we can see the actual handling of the microscope, how to focus it, how to switch the lenses, and so forth. So these are all explained in detail, for example, in these 2 videos. We also will see that we have some handouts, and these handouts tell you exactly what you need to know for that lab if you get one of these. So for example, if this says tissues for labs 2 and 3, and we open this thing, then what we will see is all of the tissues that we have to identify. So all the tissues that we're going to have to identify for Lab Unit 1 are on this sheet. You will find that your lab manual has some tissues that we will not be studying. If they're not on this sheet, then you don't need to know them for the lab practical. And this is a very important point. You will not be asked about tissues or structures on tissues in lab that are not on this sheet. Now, when we get into lecture, we may have some other tissues that we'll see in lecture that you will need to be able to identify. So, for example, when we get to the tissue level of organization, then we will be studying different types of tissues, but we will not have to identify them in histological sections. So you won't be seeing a microscope slide that says identify this tissue and where it came from. So that's something that's very important to note. So when you see something in lab like a handout, you will be expected to know what is on the handout. You'll also be getting some assignments for lab, and these will not be due for a grade, but they are there to help you study. And if you do some of these questions that are assigned to you and you follow along in the lab manual and you do the exercises in the lab manual that are pertinent to that particular lab, then you will find that you will be well prepared for the lab practical. Now, let's take a look at the syllabus. So I'm going to go back up here to start here, and we're going to look at the lecture syllabus first. And this is important because what it does is it not only gives you the background for the course, what textbooks you need, what supplies you need, gives some information about me, where to find me. So my office is Greensboro Campus Center 107. And my phone number, I am probably most easily reached at my personal phone number, which is given in the Moodle shell. So you'll find it there underneath my picture. And you'll also see, well, that's not the one I want to do. You'll also see my email address for GTCC under my picture. So what this does, this syllabus is important because it outlines for you the learning objectives for the course. And these are the overall course level learning objectives. So this is what you are expected to be able to do by the end of the course. Then we have our grading rubric here, or I should say our grading scale. And that tells you your cutoff for an A, B, C, D, and F. So this is basically a 10-point scale. We're going to have 4 lecture exams and a comprehensive final exam. And the final exam is mandatory. So if you have to miss an exam, then you have to make arrangements to take it beforehand. You cannot say after the fact, oh, I had some emergency come up and I missed a test. And that's true for any test. Now let's look at the breakdown of the grade. So we're going to have 4 lecture exams at the end of each unit, and they are worth 12 points each. Since we have 4 of them, we have a total of 48% of your grade will be determined by the 4 lecture exams. The final exam is worth 12%, so it's weighted the same as your lecture exams. And overall, the lecture average is going to be worth 60%. Now, for our lab activities, we're going to have 3 lab practicals. They're going to be worth 10% each, so that means the lab practicals total will be worth 30%. And then we're going to have lab quizzes, and these will be worth 1% each. And while that doesn't sound like much, if you blow off a lot of lab quizzes, then they do add up. If you miss 5 lab quizzes, then you will lose 5 points of your overall grade. However, you do get to drop 1. So if for some reason you just didn't get to lab in time and you were late because you were in a traffic jam or whatever, then you can drop your lowest grade. Then we have some interesting or important information about policy. So the ADA statement, for example, if you have disabilities that you need accommodated, then this tells you exactly how to get those forms and fill out those forms. Title IX, so for example, if you feel that there's been any discrimination or harassment, then this gives you the information on whom to contact. We have some coronavirus information here, since we're in the midst of the pandemic. And I should emphasize it's very important to follow all safety protocols. We're having a resurgence of this right now, and while it may not be deadly in 98% of cases, it can leave some very, very nasty, long-lasting sequelae that nobody knows how long they'll last. So we really want to avoid getting this, and we want to avoid spreading it around. Now remember that some of your students and your classmates and some of you may work in healthcare. So you have to be especially careful because you may pick it up at work and be carrying it. Hopefully you won't get it yourself, but if you are carrying it and bring it to the lab and you're not careful with your hygiene, then your student in the bench next to you could get it and take it home to their elderly parents or to their young children. So we have to be very careful, and we have to recognize that there are vulnerable populations out there that other students and faculty members may be exposed to on a regular basis. So I'm going to be very persnickety about proper wearing of a mask. So when you wear your mask, it has to be over your nose and mouth. So when we put it on, it looks like this. And it is tightly fixed at the nose, and it should not gap, and it should not be falling down over your face. We don't want any of this. I see a lot of people in lab coming to lab like this. Do not wear the mask below your nose because it doesn't do anybody any good. The whole point of the mask is to keep small droplets and small particles that might be carrying the virus from escaping from your breath and from your mouth and your nose. So this is why we must cover both the mouth and the nose, and the mask must be tight. Now, if for whatever reason your mask, after a while, and you're feeling like you're getting a little lightheaded, you may step outside and you may take it off and take some breaths and come back into the lab. But you have to go outside, and you have to be out of where you could be exposed to other people, or other people could be exposed to you. Now, the lecture portion is entirely online. So all of the work in this class is online, and it is up to you to keep up with it, to keep pace with it. The labs, obviously we come to lab on a regular basis. We come every week. So you will be given the materials that you are expected to know before you come to lab, so that when you get to lab, you are ready to participate in the lab, and you know the procedures and you know what we're doing. Some of the experiments we will not have time to do. We will not have time to do them in their entirety. Some may be entirely demonstrated online. Some we may do part of the experiment, or I may demonstrate it for the class as a whole. But you need to come to lab. You will have most of your lab quizzes will be administered in lab. The final exam will be administered on the last lab day, which will be during the final exam week. So this is an important distinction. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So all of the lecture tests 1 through 4 will be online, but the the lecture final will be held in lab. All 3 lab practicals will be held in lab. So you have to come to lab. You have to come on a regular basis. It's not something that you can just skip and expect to be able to get everything you need online. We're going to have some discussions in there. We're going to have a lot of review sessions. We're going to have a lot of hands-on experimentation. And for example, when we do certain dissections, you'll want to see the dissections in lab because it's so much better to see them for real than just rely on some video that someone may have made. All right, so in the event that the school closes, usually this pops up in red, as we've seen on the GTCC main website. And if there are any reasons that I should have to cancel class, I will inform you via email. Not only will I be constantly updating the Moodle classroom, but I will also constantly be sending out emails with updates on assignments and other things. So do pay attention to that. And anytime a class would be canceled for any reason. And also, you can sign up for the alert system that will alert you if there's like a weather closure or anything like that. So if there's ice on the roads, or it's snowing, or there's a hurricane, or any of those things. So then we have some other important things that we need to be aware of. We have our student privacy. So this you should read very carefully. And you have to make sure that you don't inadvertently give out information about your peers online, on social media or whatever, or just inadvertently when you're sending out maybe course materials to other students, that you don't somehow compromise yours with your data. Now, when we look at the intellectual property, we have to remember that all of this material that we're using comes from copyrighted texts. And our Pearson text, for example, and I'll go over that in just a moment, is copyrighted. So we can't just be indiscriminately taking pictures of it and sharing it around on the internet. So this is for academic use only. So we have to respect that as well. So academic integrity, this just simply states that you will not cheat. And cheating is simply consulting sources while you're taking tests that are closed book. So you may not, on any lab quiz or any lecture test or the final exam, use any source material, internet searches, Siri, Cortana, or whatever else to help you with the test. The test is to be taken from the knowledge that is in your brain. So there should be no looking up stuff. So it'd be real easy to copy out some of these study outlines that I've made and have them in your lap while you're taking the test and just look through them while you're taking the test. This is absolutely verboten. If we catch you doing it, then you'll be expelled from the class. So we're expecting you to do the coursework and course material and take the test entirely on your own. You cannot take them with your friends. Now, there may be some group projects. They won't be graded, but there may be some group projects in which there's perfectly allowable to have collaboration among the students. Now, all of the rest of this basically just talks about the expectations for class attendance, how much time you should be spending. For most people, especially if you've not had a lot of background in this before, it's going to take at least 10 hours a week outside of going through the posted Moodle materials and lab. We also will have our turnaround policy. Grading typically is done within a week of when the test was taken. The email turnaround policy, usually if you email me with a problem, if I don't respond to you personally, it may be a question that everybody in the class has, and I may respond with a blanket email to everyone that this is a frequently asked question and this is how we're going to deal with it. So, for example, if we move the date of a test or something, then I will send a blanket email to everyone that we have decided to move the date of a test. So you shouldn't then write an email and says, oh, by the way, are we moving the test to such and such a date? Because I will answer some things in large mass emails. If you have a very specific question or you need specific help or have a specific topic that you want to discuss, then I will try to get back to you within 24 hours. It may take a little bit longer on the weekend and holidays, but 24 hours from the time that I receive an email, I will try to have a response for you. Now, there are some exceptions. In some cases, I have actually been deluged with so many emails that it takes quite a while to get through them all. And if I receive 100 emails in a day, unfortunately, sometimes your email might be at the very, very bottom, and I didn't scroll down far enough to get it. So if that's the case and I haven't emailed you back, then just send another email, and I will try to get to you as soon as possible. But do be aware that sometimes I may miss an email because I get a large volume of emails on that day. Now, the things that are different that I really want to draw your attention to if you've taken a class like this before is because of the way we're formatting the class this semester, we're going to have our lab practicals in class. The final exam for the lecture will also be given in class. It will not be given online. You must come to class. If for any reason you have to miss a lab and you know you're not going to be able to come, then talk to me beforehand and I can either put you with another section or we can arrange to do the test before the class takes the test. You cannot come to me after the fact and say, oh, well, I had an emergency pop up and I couldn't take the test. Now, if somebody tests positive for COVID the day of a test, well, that's a slight exception, and we would be able to accommodate that either by or lab practical, either by having a lab practical specifically for people who are in quarantine, but we won't do it for any other reasons. So we're not going to have somebody say, oh yeah, well my tire went flat and I didn't get here in time, or who knows what else, my dog died or whatever. So you have to come to lab and you have to take the lab practicals during the lab period. Now, if you had a major emergency and you're lucky enough to have a lab early in the week, you might be able to take it with a later section. But that is only if somebody has an emergency that they can show documentation for, like they had a sick relative or they were sick and they went to the doctor and they get a note that verifies that. So what we don't want is an abuse of this policy where people try to get extra time for studying by requesting more time for the tests. So lab practicals 1, 2, and 3 are going to be given in class. The final exam, once again, for the lecture will be given in class. The lab quizzes, some will be online, some will be in class, and I'll let you know beforehand. And all the lab quizzes will always be on what we covered the previous week. So you'll have time actually to go through the lab that week and then study the material. And then the next week in lab, we will have the lab quiz. One of the things I would like you to notice, this lecture syllabus here is for all 3 sections. So there are 3 sections of BIO168 that I'm teaching, and I'm teaching FGBO3, 04, and 05. If you are an FGBO3 or FGBO5, you are meeting on Tuesday, and if you're an FGBO4, you are on Thursday. So depending on what your lab time is, then that will determine your designation of your course. And what we will see is that we've got the syllabus here is going to have 2 separate dates. So for the beginning date for our Tuesday lab is obviously January 12th, which is a Tuesday, and the Thursday lab will be January 14th, which is a Thursday. The census dates, very important. You must attend class before or on this date in order to stay in the class. Otherwise, you will be administratively kicked out of the class. And so the census dates are the 19th for the Tuesday class and the 21st for the Thursday class. The withdrawal date is April 5th. So that is the date that you must withdraw by in order to basically not have to worry about getting a really bad grade if you're failing. All right, now, notice the times for each of the 3 sections. They're here. The final exam date then will be May 4th for anybody who's got a Tuesday class, and May 6th for anybody who has a Thursday class. So I just wanted to be sure that everybody understood that the 2 separate dates are for the 2 different dates on which the class occurs. So I've got one section that meets from 12 to 2:40 on Tuesday, a later section that meets from 5:45 to 8:25. The dates obviously are the same regardless of what time the class actually meets. The Thursday class meets from 12 p.m. to 12:40 or 2:40 p.m. Sorry about that. And once again, the second date on here always pertains to the Thursday group. One other thing I would really like to bring your attention to is something near the bottom of the syllabus here, and that's Titan Link. Titan Link can be a lifesaver. It is basically a service that allows students to get help when disaster strikes. So if somebody, for example, is having difficulty paying rent or being able to get food or groceries or having difficulty with transportation, Titan Link can help. Another thing is if your life circumstances change suddenly and you're no longer able to be financially responsible for your education, sometimes you can get what's called a finish line grant, which will help students be able to finish their studies and complete their programs so that they don't have to drop out. And this is a very important and useful service that I encourage everyone to look at and understand. It's there if you need it. And if you know somebody else who's struggling, you can also guide them to Titan Link. And basically you click this link here and it will have all the information that you need. And there are several campuses There's several offices in each campus on High Point, Jamestown, and Greensboro. I'm not sure when the office hours are right now. I think some of them may be closed at the moment. I'm not sure if the High Point office is open at the moment, but you can always call and you can always find out if they're open, and you can learn about some of the student-assisted programs that they have here. So this is a resource, once again, that is very important that you know about, and it's there if you need it. All right, now let's look at test dates. This is also important. So you have to know that right now, these are when the tests are scheduled. Now, one of the things I want you to notice is that they are scheduled on a Thursday. And that is because in a regular classroom setting, the lecture portion would be Tuesdays and Thursdays for both classes. So we have 2 meeting times per week. That would be about an hour and 15 to hour and 20 minutes for each class. And so I have put all the tests on a Thursday, and these tests will be available from 12 to 24 hours so that most everyone can take it, so that regardless of one's work circumstances, that we should have at least 12 hours, if not 24, to take the exam so that everybody will have a chance to take it. If for some crazy reason you absolutely cannot take it on that day and you know beforehand, then I can open it up for you before that date, but not after. So you have to make arrangements with me beforehand if you know, let's say you have a work conflict where you know you're going to be on some training thing, or you know you're going to, let's say you're in the military and you have military drill that week or whatever, or some strange thing, or you're getting ready to mobilize, then you have to let me know before the test date so that I can basically open the test up to you before the rest of the class takes the test, and of course give you a separate test so that you won't be taking the same test everyone else will. Another thing is the tests are randomized. So the questions are randomized, and no 2 tests are going to be the same. So just to let you know that right now. So sharing a round of exams is not going to work if somebody has the idea that they are going to, try to share answers. The other thing, once again, I'm putting this out here again for the 3rd time just to make sure everybody understands the comprehensive final exam is live. It is in lab. And if you have a Tuesday lab day, it's going to be on the 4th. And if you have a Thursday lab day, it's going to be on the 6th. And that just lets you know that you have to be there. You have to be present. It will be live. The other thing is, once again, unlike previous semesters where we have allowed students to replace their lowest lecture grade with the final exam grade, we're not doing that this semester. And that's because we have had some abuse of this particular system, so we've just stopped doing it. So I wanted to point that out because that's also very important. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the lab syllabus. So each of the, depending on which lab you're in, if you get the lab syllabus and you open it up, you will see the date at which the lab will occur and what the topic is covered and what exercises there are. So there may be some exercises in the lab manual, or there may be some handouts that you'll be receiving, or for some, you may get both. Now, sometimes we're going to have to compress 2 labs into one. A good portion of that will be online so that you'll be able to see a lot of things online that we wouldn't otherwise have time in class to cover. Now, another thing I want to show you is the lab quizzes. So each lab quiz, once again, is going to be on the preceding lab. So what this talks about here, the notes, the lab quiz 1 online, that means that lab 1 will prepare you for lab quiz 1. So lab quiz 1 will open right after lab 1 finishes, and it will stay open until the following Monday. Once again, it's going to open up that Tuesday of January 12th. So if you're in the January 14 lab, that means wait till after you've had lab to take it. If you take it, you only get 1 chance at it. And if you fail it because you attempted it before lab and you didn't do so well, that's on you. So just make sure that you've actually come to lab before you attempt the lab quiz. So it's open for everyone in both sections. So just be aware of that. Now, lab 2 and 3 will probably also be online. Right now, I'm planning for them to be online. Labs 4, most of these other labs will be in class. So lab 4 will be about osmosis and diffusion, but will not be during the osmosis and diffusion class. So it will be during the following lab. Now, one thing I want you to notice, if we have a lab practical, we will still have a lab quiz for the previous lab. So lab osmosis and diffusion will be covered in lab practical 1. We will also be learning the topics during osmosis and diffusion that will be on lab quiz 4. Lab quiz 4 will be taken the next lab in class. So basically it will be taken for lab number 5. So all of these here just basically tell you what quiz this is going to prepare you for. And the actual quiz itself will be taken the next lab later. We typically will have 11. If there's the possibility to have a 12th lab quiz, I will. And that will just give you more opportunities to do well. We'll see how many we can actually have. And that will be entirely dependent upon time. Now, another thing that I wanted to point out is most lab quizzes will have 10 points each. Sometimes they will have more. Sometimes they will have many more questions. But then again, they will be weighted accordingly. Remember that your lab quizzes are going to be 1% of your overall grade. So 1% of your overall grade will be determined by each lab quiz. So don't take them lightly. They are important. And there are no makeups that will be offered. If you missed one because you just didn't show up to lab, then that's too bad. Now, the laboratory rules I have to be very specific about, and I want to emphasize you've got to come on time so that you can take the lab quiz. The lab quiz, interestingly, may be given any time during the lab. Could be given during the beginning of the lab or toward the end of the lab. And that's at my discretion, and that is to prevent people from coming, taking the lab quiz, and leaving. We will be very specific about supplies and equipment, cleaning up our area before we leave, and we're going to be spraying it down both when we arrive and when we leave the area for pandemic protocol. If for any reason you should drop some glass or break something, let me know, and I will put it in the appropriate bin or initiate the appropriate cleanup. If you yourself are injured, let me know immediately, and I will call an EMT or 911 or whatever needs to be done to make sure that you're treated appropriately and promptly. We're not going to have any cell phones unless you're actually using it for either taking pictures of the models or the dissections that we're doing, or possibly to access some of this course material online. Once again, if I catch you using the phone for non-lab activities, it's going to stay with me at the front of the lab until the end of the lab. As you know, no food or drinks are to be brought into the lab due to OSHA regulations. And that is because there are things in the lab that can be absorbed by food that are very dangerous. So we have formalin preservatives in there. Formalin preservatives are not something that you want in your food. And that means no food in your backpacks either. So no food or water bottles in your backpacks. They have to be outside the lab. They cannot be in the lab, even within a sealed container. They must be outside. This is an OSHA regulation. And some of those impervious containers are not as impervious as you might think to certain airborne chemicals. So you've got to keep the food. I'd keep medicines out of the lab as well. Another thing that's very important is if you come into the lab, don't throw your empty food containers or food wrappers or drink bottles in the trash, even if they're empty. Because if an OSHA inspector comes through there and sees that stuff in the trash, they don't know that you came in and threw it in the trash as you came in the door. They will assume that you consumed it in the lab, and they will then fine the school big fines if they find that stuff in the lab. So it's very important that you do not bring any food items or food container items in the lab. So leave it outside the lab. Try to make sure to leave any food items that you may have in your car or whatever, but don't bring it in the lab. So I can't stress that enough. Also, be very mindful of the fact that we have to maintain social distance in the lab. And while it might be tempting to crowd over your neighbor to see something, I'm going to do my best to make sure that every student has the chance to see each display on his or her own so that each person can come up individually and look at each display. And this is going to be especially important when we do the microscope labs, because I don't want two people standing shoulder to shoulder taking turns looking in the microscope. So each student is going to have his or her own microscope. And if we rotate around and look at each other's microscopes, we must maintain at least 6 feet of distance between each one of us. So that's what I've got for lab. If you have any questions, we will address them in class, and I will also make sure that anytime there is an update to any of this that I will let you know. Once again, I will email the student body of the class as a whole so that everybody will get the same emails and have access to the same information. Once again, this will be continually updated, and I will continually be sending you emails about updates both in the Moodle shell and any changes that we might make to any of the lab activities as well.